the candelabra with this oil from Truma on Yom Tov. And the Gemara said the reason why you can't do that is because you can't burn kachim. We said that you can't burn kachim that became contaminated. You can't use the kachim that became contaminated. You can't burn it on Yom Tov. Meaning, there's a law that says that if pieces of parts of a sacrifice or things that were consecrated to Hashem that became contaminated. I mean, let's probably it's more sacrifice type of things that became contaminated. You have to go ahead and burn. There's a mitzvah to burn those items, but the question is, I could burn those items on a weekday, but can I burn those items on Yom Tov? Can I use it as fuel on Yom Tov? So now, first of all, to use it as fuel for personal use, we know you wouldn't be able to use kachim that became contaminated for personal use. Even during the weekdays, when you have a mitzvah to burn it, you can't benefit from it. And we learn out, the Gemara says that even though you have a mitzvah to burn the kachim, the holy sacrifice parts that became contaminated, you have a mitzvah to burn it, but you can't do that burning on Yom Tov. And the Gemara says so too, you can't burn truma that became contaminated. You can't burn it on Yom Tov. Even though there's a difference between truma and kachim and the sacrifice parts, that the parts of the sacrifice that became contaminated, when you burn it during the weekdays, you cannot benefit. Truma, we said, when you burn it during the weekdays, you could benefit. So we have two items, both they're equal, and both the scenario, the cases, they both were contaminated, but one is truma that goes to the kohen, and one is parts of the korban of the offering, which is not truma, it's called kachim. It's holy foods, and that holy food, when you have a mitzvah to burn when it becomes contaminated, but you cannot benefit from it. So now the Gemara, we are now on 25a1. So we say the following: Be Yom Tov, when it's Yom Tov, Hud Asir. On Yom Tov, that's when it is forbidden to burn using the oil of Truma. You can't burn it on Yom Tov when it became contaminated. Habachol, but if it would be weekdays, Shapid Damid. You could use it for fuel, for your lamp, for your lighting, for your heating, because it says the Mishnah stated the only time you can't use as candles, as light, the only time you can't use contaminated truma light is on Yom Tov, which implies Yom Tov I can't, meaning if I can never use it, then I can never be, and I should not say just Yom Tov I can't use it. I should say I can Emalikin. I never could light. I can never light with truma, even during the day, even during Shabbat, Yom Tov, or even for a weekday, because if I will not be able to benefit from it, I can never light it. Hadlaka, madlikin means lighting for the purpose of benefit. So if I tell you you can't light for the purpose of benefit on Yom Tov, the implication is on a weekday I could do it. So Gemara wants to know, but during the weekdays it's permitted. So the Gemara says, what is the reason for this law? Now, we say truma, when you burn during the weekdays, you could benefit from it. There's a discussion, who has the right to benefit from the truma when it gets burned? When you're using it for lighting purposes, is it only for the kohanim or even non-kohanim? So seems to be a discussion about that issue. But so the Gemara says, "My timer. What is the reason behind this leniency and allowance to benefit from truma that became contaminated, and you have to burn it? That you what's the source that you could benefit during the burning of that truma?" Amarav. It says the following: "Yishem shem mitzvah l'sofer kachim shenitmu." Just like there's a mitzvah to burn kachim that became contaminated, kach yesh mitzvah l'sofer truma shenitmeis. We say this is a mitzvah to burn truma that became contaminated, and we said Rashi explains two reasons why should you burn truma. If the Torah writes the law of burning kachim, sacrifice parts that became contaminated, what does that have to do with truma? Truma is not something. It's not kachim. It's not sacrifice parts. It's food that goes to the kohen. So Rashi says because truma is very similar to kachim. It falls into and we have the same law as kachim truma. Also a type of a holy food. And furthermore, we said because we don't want a stumbling block. Because if you go ahead and leave truma that's contaminated around, people might come to eat from it. And it's a big sin to eat from it. Therefore, you got to go ahead and burn it. Now, Tosfos says, based on Rashi's second reason, that you want to remove any stumbling block, the people shouldn't come to eat the truma that became contaminated. Therefore, you could get rid of the truma in any way. You don't have to go in and specifically burn the truma that became contaminated. That would be, according to the second reason of Rashi, the fact that Rashi's second point would indicate that Rashi would hold that you could burn truma, you can remove truma, get rid of truma in any way. Technically, according to that, if you take the truma and you would spill it out somewhere, and you wouldn't burn that truma that became contaminated, according to that Rashi, it would seem that you'd be fine because you removed the stumbling block. Now there's no more stumbling block. But Tosfos, meaning because according to Rashi's second reason, it's all about a stumbling block. It's all about a stumbling block. That reason would hold you do not have to burn it specifically. However, Tosfos argues, and he brings from the Mishnah Tmura, that you have to burn it. The only question Tosfos has is the burning of the truma a biblical that became contaminated? Is that a biblical mitzvah? Is that a rabbinical mitzvah? And the question is it biblical because it's called truma? Truma is called kodesh. It is called kodesh, and kachim have to be burned. So too, maybe truma is included in the kodesh, or because truma is similar to kachim, it's not included in the Torah's law of kachim. Because of its similarity, you have to go ahead and burn it. Okay, so now the Gemara continues. So the same way there's a mitzvah to burn kachim that became contaminated, there's a mitzvah to burn truma that became contaminated. V'omer Torah, and the Torah said, "B'shat bi'ura tahani mimena." When you are burning the truma, you should have benefit from it. So this indicates, this pasuk indicates that it's a Torah law that you burn truma that became contaminated. Because the fact that the Gemara says that the Torah says that when you burn the truma, you have a right to have benefit from it. So now the Gemara says, where did the Torah say that you could benefit, you can have personal benefit? Good morning. We are on 25A1 on the bottom first column, bottom of the page. Torah. Just to bring you up to date, you said that truma that became contaminated. Now, when it's not contaminated, when it's pure, you can't burn it. You got to eat it. You can't burn it. But when the truma is contaminated, we said that you could go ahead and you have a mitzvah to burn it. But even though you got to burn it, you're not the type of burning that you can't benefit from. It's a burning that you do have you could benefit from. You could use it as heating fuel. You could use it as lighting up the house. You could benefit from it um, on when you burn the truma that became contaminated. You can't burn it on Yom Tov. We said the truma that became contaminated. Burn the weekdays you could. So Gemara is looking for what's the source. Where do we know that you could burn truma and benefit from it? When it's contaminated, you have right to benefit from it. So the Gemara says, "Heichen Amar Torah, Mid Rav Nachman, from Rav Nachman. The Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rav Avua. Rav Nachman said the name of Rav Avua. Amar Kro. The pasuk says about Midbar. Yedaber Hashem. Hashem speaks to Aaron. He says, "Ani hinei natati lecha et nishmeret tumata." I've given to you the watching, the responsibility of taking care of my truma, right? Safeguard of the truma. You're responsible to watch the truma. Got to make sure that the truma that's tahar, that's pure, does not become tamei. Yes, and the tamei truma, you got to watch it. Make sure you don't come to eat it. There are certain responsibilities you have. But the pasuk says, it says trumotai. Trumotai is plural, not trumati, my truma. Trumotai is referring to two things that I have two type of trumot. The word truma is to separate, right? You separate, you raise up. Maybe that's why it's called truma. The word truma is also within the word ram, to raise. Because when you separate the food for the Kohen, you are raising it. You are elevating it to a different level. Until now, it was mundane food. Now it's been elevated, separated, and it's elevated to become holy. Now only Kohanim could eat it, and other laws. So I've given to you, Hashem says to Aharon, Aharon, I have given to you, I've given to you the guarding of my trumotai, plural. You got it, Adam? We're talking about two trumot. Achad truma Torah. One is pure truma. Pure truma means the truma did not become contaminated. V'achad truma tmeya. And I've given you the responsibility to deal with truma that's contaminated as well. And the Torah says, Lecha, hinei natati lecha. I've given it to you. This bud's for you, right? I've given it for you. I'm not encouraging beer drinking, but I'm giving this for you. I've given this, make a nice bracha, right? I've given this for you. It's for your benefit, meaning you have a right to benefit from, the word lecha, like it says in Parashas Lech Lecha, go for your benefit. Hashem says to Abraham, you're going to leave your father's home, you're going to benefit. You're going to go to the land of Israel, you're going to get a big name, you're going to have a family, you're going to be known, fame, fortune, you're going to have everything. Lecha, it's for you, Avram. That's lecha. Lecha means for you, for your benefit. So too, I wanted to say lech lecha, sometimes it's for you, and also lecha to you. You got to go to yourself. You got to reach your potential. There's another shot of it here. Lecha. Everyone got to go to themselves. But here, the pasuk says, "I'm given the truma, my trumot, both the truma that's pure and the truma that's contaminated." If you want to send to the group, Adam, I've given to you. Lecha, we welcome Asaf. Shelcha tehei. It should be yours. Lahasika tachat tafshilcha. You have a right to use it as firewood when you're cooking your food to use it as the fuel the for the fire. You could use the oil while you're doing the mitzvah of burning it, but you have a mitzvah to burn the truma that became contaminated. So we see from this pasuk that you have a right shelcha, that it's for you. You have a right to use the oil that became contaminated, benefit from it when you're burning it. The Gemara says, I'll offer you another source that says you have a right to use the truma that became contaminated for personal use while you're burning it. The Rabbi Bahu. We have from a exposition, a drasha of Rabbi Bahu. Damar Rabbi Bahu, Rabbi Yochanan. Bahu says, Rabbi Yochanan. The pasuk says, "V'lo bi'arti menu b'tameh." What is that talking about? There's a little background. As you know, every year of the 7-year cycle, then you have 6 years, then you have Shemitah, the 7th year, correct? You've had this many times, this concept that, the first every year of the 6 years, the Shemitah is like the year off, so to speak. There's no, you're not involved in the produce. The year is, you leave the food in the 7th year. You leave the food in the 7th year. But, it's hefker, belongs to everybody. But the first 6 years, you have, every year you got to give Ralph. Ralph got to get 10% every year. You got to give 10% to Ralph. You got to go give to the Kohen. First, you give to the Kohen is 2%. The average guy gives 2%. Then you give after you give the 2% for the remaining 98. From the remainder, you give 10% to Ralph, to the Levi, and then after you give to the Levi, first and the second year, you take 10% to Jerusalem. You eat it. Your family eats it. And the third year, you give, instead of taking 10% to Jerusalem, you go ahead and you give 10% of the crop to the poor people. That's how the first 3 years, and you repeat that the next 3 years. Okay? So again, Ma'aser Rishon, Ma'aser Sheni, the first 2 years, and the fourth and fifth year. You do Ma'aser Rishon, Ma'aser Sheni, which is 10% to the Levi and 10% you take to Jerusalem for you to eat, and you repeat that the fourth and fifth year. In the third and sixth year, you go ahead and you give, every year the Levi gets, all 6 years Levi gets. The only change is year 3, instead of 10% going to Jerusalem, the 10% goes to the poor. So that is, and now the Torah said that a person actually has to make a declaration. After 3 years, when you come to the holiday of Pesach, you have to make a declaration. I've taken care of it. I've done my due diligence, and I removed all the truma that I need to give to the Kohen, the Maisa. I've taken care of the tithes, and that's what he needs to do. Now, so what's interesting, Maisa Sheni is the food that I 10% I take to Yerushalayim. So here we're talking about, and anybody. So it says like this. It says, if you have in your possession produce, you need to make sure you separate it and remove all your produce before Erev Pesach of the year after the 3-year cycle. It's very fascinating. Erev Pesach is always almost like April 15th. It's like always Pesach, Passover comes out in the time of making sure you got to pay your taxes. And isn't it fascinating that around that time, Erev Pesach is the time you got to make sure you pay up your tax. Like the deadline for those 3 years, instead of it being an every year deadline or every year type of thing, it's every 3 years. After the 3-year cycle, so then when you get to Pesach time, you have to make sure that by Erev Pesach, you have removed that's the deadline to remove all the So Pesach will be tonight. Seems like that by before tonight, I have to make sure everything has been separated and given out. Then, after that's done, then the last day of Pesach, which is like the seventh day, the Torah's last day of Pesach is the seventh day of Passover, you say a certain confession. You say a certain in the Beit HaMikdash because you're there for Ola Regel. You're there because every year you have to go to the Beit HaMikdash. Every male has to go 3 times a year to the Beit HaMikdash on the holiday of Pesach. Sukkot and Shavuot, they're called the 3 regalim, the Shalosh regalim. You're going there. So you're there, and while you're there, you need to make a certain, in the Beit HaMikdash, make a certain statement. It's called a confession. Commentators talk, why is it called a confession? Confession, I did something wrong. Here I'm saying I did everything right. So why is it called a vidui maestro? It's a statement, a declaration on your maaser. But technically, even though you're supposed to go ahead and there's a mitzvah to do the confession in the statement, the declaration in the Beit HaMikdash, nevertheless, if you made the confession anywhere, you fulfilled your responsibility. And now, what does the person say? So part of his declaration, he says, Lo bi'arti mimenu b'tameh. I did not go ahead and I did not consume from the Ma'aser Sheni in a state of contamination. What does that mean? It means whether the person is Tameh, you can't eat Ma'aser Sheni if you're Tameh. If you happen to have gone to a funeral and became contaminated, and you have produce in Yerushalayim that you need to eat in Jerusalem because it was Ma'aser Sheni, the type that 10% you brought to Yerushalayim, you can't eat it when you're in a state of contamination. And also, you can't eat it if the Ma'aser Sheni is Tameh, meaning either if you, the person, is contaminated, you can't eat this Ma'aser Sheni, this food that you had to take to Yerushalayim. Remember, it's interesting. It's your food. You take 10%, you got to bring it to Jerusalem, and it has to be, and you have to eat it in the old city. If you live too far away from the old city, it's too hard for you to carry the produce. So what do? You redeem the produce onto coins, and you have to add a fifth, and then you bring those coins to Jerusalem, and then you buy the food in the old city. And part of the reason why Hashem wants you to go to every Jew, or Hashem says you have to take 10% of your produce, year 1 and year 2 and year 4 and year 5, every 7 years. You're going to be spending your 4 years that you're going to have produce. 10% of your produce is going to be eaten in Jerusalem. So either you'll go to Jerusalem to eat it, you'll send your children to go to Jerusalem to eat it. And so what happened is the Sefer Chinuch says, so let's say the father would stay at home and not go to Jerusalem, he would send his kids to go to Jerusalem. The wife's at home. Other kids are at home. Maybe there's younger kids at home. So you send the older kids at home. And when Jerusalem was a city of scholars, Jerusalem was a city of holiness, so to speak, because you had the Sanhedrin, you had the high court in Jerusalem. You had the Sanhedrin, the greatest rabbis of the generation were in Jerusalem, the men of the greatest, the 71 members of the court, that we call the Sanhedrin HaGadol, the big court. Other courts were, let's say, 23, courts to do capital punishment, you had a minimum of 23 judges do capital punishment. You get a minimum of 3 judges, right, Ralph? 3 judges could do monetary cases, financial issues, but to kill somebody, you need a court of 23 judges, and therefore the children that would go to the old city, what would they be doing? They have the food. What would they be doing in the old city? They have all the food expenses. They would go ahead and they would study. They would become educated. They would come back home and they would teach the parents, like you have today's generation. A lot of the young people, they go to yeshiva. The parents might not have went to yeshiva. They come home and they educate their parents in a proper fashion. And therefore, that ensured that the Jewish community would be very, first of all, connected with the old city, because you got to eat this in the old city, and the great inspiration that the people that go into the old city would have, how it would have a great impact on the lives of everybody um, wherever they lived. So that is, but the Torah says, I did not consume it. I did not consume this Ma'aseh Sheni. I didn't when I went ahead and I burnt it, right? Or even if I burnt it, right? I so I cannot burn it and use it. I can't lo bi'arti mimenu b'tameh. You can also translate the pasuk. I did not consume it to burn to use it for fire purposes, and I did not have that benefit of the consumption of the truma of the Ma'aseh Sheni when it was tamei. If it was tamei, I did not use it as fuel. So I'm making a statement. I'm making a statement about my Ma'aseh Sheni. I'm making the statement about the Ma'aseh Sheni that if the Ma'aseh Sheni was tamei, I did not I did not have it as fuel. Lo ba'arti, I did not burn it in a sense, a burning of benefit when the Ma'aseh Sheni was contaminated. What does that imply? Okay, but it says I did not burn it to use in a state when, but I said from it. It could have, the pasuk could have said, "Lo ba'arti," I did not consume and benefit from, and that lo ba'arti b'tameh. I did not benefit when it was tameh. The pasuk did not need to say. See, why does the pasuk say mimenu? The pasuk says. See, the pasuk before says lo achalti be'oni mimenu. I did not eat the Yisrael if a person lost one of his seven close relatives, right? There's the biblical responsibility to mourn for those seven relatives, and to, even if a person is a Kohen, he contaminates himself to those seven close relatives. The Kohen contaminates himself with his father, his mother, his brother, his sister, his son, his daughter, and his wife, right? His sister who was not married, he contaminates himself too, and his wife. But if, let's say, if somebody is not a Kohen, any person who has Ma'aseh Sheni, this 10% they eat in Jerusalem, if they lost one of their close relatives, they're not allowed to eat that Ma'aseh Sheni between the death of the person, their relative, until the burial. Between the death and the burial, the person is in a state called an onain, aninut. That's a level where a person loses a relative until the burial. There are certain laws on that person. He has certain responsibilities of taking care of the dead body, organizing the funeral, and therefore there are certain laws that kick in as a result of that. You know, it's not a time that he doesn't get busy. You know, it's not a time that he's busy doing other mitzvot like davening and prayer, because you're supposed to be taking care of the dead body, organizing the funeral, and so on and so forth. But there is other laws that kick in, and here's a law that kicks in. He can't eat the Ma'aseh Sheni when he's in a state of aninut. When he's in a state that between the death and the burial, he can't eat this food, which has a certain status of holiness, because it's, listen, the fact that this Ma'aseh Sheni food has to be eaten in the old city shows you the certain status of holiness. That's a law that the Torah says, and he makes the confession, and he makes the declaration, and he says, you know what? I've done it right. I did not. He says, I did not eat from this Ma'aser Sheni when if there was a, if he had a relative that passed away, and he was in the state of aninut before the burial, between the death and the burial. He says, lo achalti ba'oni mimenu. I did not go ahead and eat it in that state. And he also says, Lo ba'arti mimenu b'tameh. He says, I did not consume it and consume it in a way of benefit when it was contaminated, or the food was contaminated. I did not benefit from it in the state of contamination. But it says mimenu, from it I did not benefit from when it was contaminated, which seems to indicate that item, specifically this type of item, when it's tamei or I'm tamei, I can't benefit from. But if it would have been some other item, namely the Gemara is suggesting the other item is truma, then I could benefit from it when it's tamei, meaning I could benefit in the burning. Meaning it says specifically why Ma'aser Sheni lo bi'artini, I did not burn it and use it in the burning for pleasure when I was contaminated, or that was contaminated from that item specifically, but indicating this, it's like you call it a miyut. It's being specific. It's specifying this, excluding something else. Meaning only this item is subject to this law that you can't benefit from the burning of Ma'aser Sheni. It's this, but something else I could benefit. So what is that? Meaning by the fact that Torah goes out of its way, says the word menu from it, is emphasizing this, but something else I could benefit. Is that clear? This item you can't do. You can't indicate something else you could. What is the other thing you could? That's what the Gemara says. The menu yatamavir. You can't. We're on the right side, on the right 25a1 in Ababahu. Again, I can't benefit from this, from the Ma'aser Sheni when it's tamei. However, when it's contaminated, but what I could consume and burn and light up and benefit from during the destruction of the burning of the truma, I could benefit from. This one I can't. Ma'aser Sheni I can't. Both are being burnt, but one I can't benefit from, and one I could benefit from. I could go ahead and burn up something and benefit from truma that became contaminated. So the Gemara now asks a very interesting question. We have something we're inferring. We're saying there's an inference, let's say, if you want to call it that there's something here that you're allowed to go ahead and benefit from when you burn. Ma'aser Sheni, Torah says you can't. But the extra word, mimenu, tells us this one you can't, something else you could. And we're naming that other item that you could benefit from when you burn it, we're naming it as truma. That's the item that we're allowing you to benefit from. So the Gemara says, why say it's truma? Maybe the Torah is teaching you that you could benefit from kadashim, the sacrificed parts of the animal that became, if it became contaminated and you have to burn it, maybe the Torah is telling you, you know what? When you're burning those items, you have a right to benefit from when you burn it. How do you know if there's, how do you know to say the thing that you're allowed to benefit from is truma when you're burning, when it became contaminated? Maybe it's the kachim, the holy food that you can benefit from when you're burning. And the Gemara is going to say, it's going to give a little preview, that kachim, holy sacrifice food, is more holier than truma. One is something that's, first of all, truma you should, and the Gemara is going to show you that there's more stringencies regarding kodashim, holy foods that were parts of a sacrifice, designated as a sacrifice. That's different. That's an offering. That's different than truma. And because it's more strict than truma, so if we have to say there's an allowance of something, so the allowance would go for truma more than kachim, because kachim are more strict. So if we're more strict generally by kachim, and the Torah is giving us an allowance that you could benefit from something in the consumption, so more likely it's giving us an allowance of something which is not as holy as something else. And therefore, kachim would not be able to benefit when you destroy it, but truma you could benefit. That's giving you a little. That's going to be the. But the Gemara is going to. We'll see how the Gemara plays it out. So the Gemara says, again, the Ema. The Gemara brought up the question. The Ema menu yatama. Is everything clear? It's a lot of not. It's not simple things going on. We're just coming out of. We're learning something that's not as things that we're used to. You know what I'm saying? It's good. As Adam, it's clear. Ralph, it's clear. Saf, it's clear what's going on here. The aim of the don't be afraid to talk up. I don't bite. The rabbi doesn't bite. You know what I mean? The aim of maybe the Torah is telling us it's being specific about Ma'aser Sheni. Maybe, by the way, just for everyone, this is called Ma'aser Rishon and Ma'aser Sheni. Why is what we give to the Ralph Ma'aser Rishon? Ma'aser means tithes. The word Ma'aser has in the root of Ma'aser is Eser. Mem, Ayin, Sin, Resh. Eser. Eser is 10. Ma'aser is 10%. This is called Ma'aser Rishon, the first Ma'aser. Ma'aser Sheni is the second Ma'aser. That means there's two types. One's type called type number one, first place. One's called Ma'aser Sheni. Sheni is second place. Ma'aser Rishon is what we give to the B'tesh family, to the Levian. Why is it called Ma'aser Rishon? Because it's the first of the Ma'aser that you take off. Meaning you have 2/10. You have 2/10 that need to be taken off, so to speak. You have to give 10% to the Leviim, and then there's something called Ma'aser Sheni, 10% that you take to Jerusalem. The part that you take to Jerusalem is called Ma'aser Sheni, the second tithe. Why is that called the second tithe? Why is the part you take to Jerusalem called the second tithe? Because when you separate it, you're separating as the second tithe. Because you first you give to the Kohen, his part. Then you take off 10%, and Kohen is not a 10% deal. If a Kohen's thing is not called Maaser. Kohen gets, the average person gives the Kohen 2%. It's not called Maaser. But what you give to the Levi is 10%. We take Jerusalem as 10%. But since the Levi's 10% is separated first, he's called Maaser Rishon. He's the first 10%. After you take off the Maaser 10% from what you give to the Levi, then from what's remaining, you take off 10% and you can take to Jerusalem. That's called Maaser Sheni. That's the second tithe. And now the Gemara says, maybe you can't go ahead and benefit from the burning of the Maaser Sheni that became contaminated. Maybe I can't benefit from that. Maybe if I have oil, holy oil that was designated for the Beit HaMikdash, that I was going to go use in the offerings, and that oil became, contaminated. Maybe the Torah is telling me, and being specific to Maaser Sheni, that I can't benefit from the burning of the oil that became contaminated with Maaser Sheni, and it's coming in further something else I could benefit from. Maybe it's oil of kachim. Maybe it's oil of holy oil. How do you know it's coming to infer truma oil you're allowed to benefit from when you burn. Maybe it's kachim oil that you could benefit from. So the Gemara says, "V'lav kavachomhu." Don't we have a kavachoma to show us? Kavachoma, as you know, is something is light and something is strict. So if the light item has a certain strength, certainly the strong item has a certain strength, right? The Gemara says, "Ma ma'aseh hakal, ma'aseh sheni," which is considered light. Why is it light? Because it is not an offering. It's the 10% that you bring to Jerusalem and you eat it there. Amra Torah, the Torah says, I can't benefit from the Ma'aseh Sheni when it is contaminated. And I have to burn it. I can't benefit from the burning. So Kodesh, Kachim, things that are holy, which are, certainly I can't. If the light item is so strong, that's the kal. So the chamur, the more strict item, certainly is Kodesh certainly I will not be able to benefit from. So when I destroy it, so the Gemara says, if that's the case, Truma namile makavachomer. We should say the same kavachomer for Truma. Say the same Maisa, which is light, Maisa Sheni. You can't benefit when you burn. So Truma is much holier than Maisa Sheni. Truma is only permitted to be eaten by the Kohanim. It's much holier. Certainly I should not be able to benefit from when I burn it when it's tamei. So the Gemara says you might have an idea, but the Torah is teaching you can benefit from it. Because the Torah says mi menu, specifically the Ma'aseh Sheni I can't benefit from, it I can't benefit from, but something else I could. Haksev mi menu, which teaches us that I could benefit. So the Gemara says, how do you know to pick if there's something the Torah is teaching you, there's something else I could benefit from. I can't benefit from the Ma'aseh Sheni with destroy it, but something else I could. And we choose that something else is Truma. How do you know Truma? Maybe it's telling us Kodesh you could benefit from. And we'll see on Monday, because Kodesh is more stricter. If you have to pick one or the other to say there's a permission to benefit from, we'll say we'll pick Truma over Kodeshim, over holy items. Have a great Shabbat, everybody. Thank you all for joining.
And tonight, Erev Rosh Chodesh.
Yes, tonight is Rosh Chodesh. Tonight in the Arvit, we say Yalav Yavo. Tonight, Shachrit, we have a special Musaf tomorrow with the Shabbat insert, and we have 2 Sifrei Torah tomorrow. A lot going on tomorrow. And Mincha Yalav Yavo. Have a great day, beautiful Chodesh. Chodesh Tov, it should be a good month. It should be turned to be a happy month. All the best, everybody. Take care, sir. Take care.